Hello, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is a live stream show between myself and the composer Stuart MacRae. Before we get started, I would like to do a brief introduction of Stuart. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, Chinwe. How are you doing?
So, Stuart MacRae is one of our most renowned modern-day composers. He's acclaimed for his operatic works. His most recent opera was Anthropocene, and there's been The Devil Inside and Ghost Patrol, for which he won a South Bank Sky Arts Award in 2013. He does chamber works, symphonies, as well as vocal works. And one of his recent album releases this year is called Earth, Thy Coldest King, which features a great soprano, Lottie Betstein. It's an amazing album. And we're here today to talk about our album together, Songs for Our Times. So this album is a song cycle album. It's made up of two song cycles, Kingdoms, which Stuart MacRae composed the music on, and Metropolis, which Bernard Hughes composed the music on. And we'll be taking the main song or the first song, Kingdoms, and discussing Kingdoms. And if we have time, we would love to talk about our other songs. So thank you for joining us, and thank you, Stuart, for coming on.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
So what I would like to do to start off, I will narrate verses of Kingdoms and talk about just what they mean or what they meant to me. So how did I get, but before we do that, how did I get to meet Stuart? How did any of this happen? So Stuart MacRae right now, he's a professor of composition at the Conservatoire, Royal Conservatoire in Scotland.
That's right, the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, yeah.
Yes, so how did I meet him? I had wanted to put together a song cycle project or really just a music project where I worked with living composers, great living composers, in a way for us to support living composers. A lot of times, if you look at the programs on the shows you go to, you see that there's a lot of work of our legendary departed composers, but our living composers aren't so represented. And I believe the future of classical music lies in the hands of the composers who are alive and shaping things now. So Kingdoms. Kingdoms I wrote in April of 2021. Sorry for any background noise. April of 2021. And but the idea to put together this project came October of 2020. So if you look at 2020, what was going on? We had the pandemic, there were the lockdowns, and you had the George Floyd murder, and you had a lot of wildfires. There were actually 9,900 wildfires in California in 2020 alone. And there was just a lot of tension. There was a lot of violence and negativity in the air. And this was a way to do something positive and just to tell a different story. And so Kingdoms was written in April of 2021. And the first verse goes like this. These are the days of turbulent living, followed by nights of rebellion brewing. These are the days where the sacred is profaned, followed by nights of cities set aflame. Where are the holy ones, the seers and the wise, to help us navigate the rapids and the fire? So in that first verse, I'm just really touching on the mood, the things that are going on, right from that 2020 up to 2021. And then in the second verse, we go, one man to rule them all, one hand to wield the sword. Soon he sets aside his earthly robes and seeks eternity for a throne. Where is the voice to whisper softly, calm and subtle? Remember, human, that you're only mortal, only mortal. So in this second verse, really touching on the fact that there's a lot of power these days in few hands. And I mean, that has always been the case, but these days there's more power than ever in fewer hands than ever before. And sometimes there doesn't seem to be that voice of caution that slows down people. You know, they say in the ancient Roman Empire, when a Roman general or emperor would go on a triumphant march through Rome, they would have an assistant or a slave who would stay behind them, and their sole job was just to whisper in their ear, memento homo, and some people say memento mori, but it's memento homo. Remember you are human, remember you are mortal. That voice of caution. And then in the third verse, it goes, the streets of history are lined with the pages, telling of kingdoms which thought they would last the ages, but they fall. Now we cast our eyes up into the sky, seeking galaxies to conquer, riches from the stars, but stars do fall, they fall. And in this third verse, I was just touching on the fact that there's a lot of escapism, or whilst the earth burns, literally and figuratively, some people are seeking escape. They feel perhaps if I build an underground bunker, I'll be safe. And actually, there's huge demand for $1 million underground bunkers. I've read articles where the people who build it say they can't even keep up with the demand. And of course, there is the looking out to outer space, this idea that you could colonize Mars or some other planet while neglecting the one that we actually have, the one that we do know sustains life for sure. So I'm touching on that. And when I speak of kingdoms in this, in my lyrics, I'm not referring only to kingdoms, land kingdoms. I'm referring also to industrial corporations, which are like kingdoms in themselves, you know, and the leaders of those corporations. And then we have the chorus of the song, which goes, Alexandria, where is the book of wisdom? Did we lose it in the ashes, or is it hidden safely underground? Alexandria, our ship is in the harbor. Don't let it leave before we find the prize. Goodbye, Alexandria, goodbye. And actually, the first line of this chorus actually came to me in about 2009. And after Stuart talks about the music, I'll talk a bit about how I write, the writing style. So it's a line from a long time ago. And I've always been fascinated with the Great Library of Alexandria. And so I was touching on that because if there was anywhere where you would find the Book of Wisdom, it would be there. And actually, it was there. That's a library that was built by Ptolemy the First, commissioned the building, and it was built over 100 years or so. And there's a book of translation called the Septuagint, which is one of the most important books of translation ever in history. And this particular book had the Book of Wisdom, and it was in the Great Library of Alexandria, the Royal Library at one point, and then moved to the smaller library before it was finally destroyed. That was destroyed in the 4th century. And so I'm touching on that in the song. So I've spoken a lot. I'm going to let Stuart speak now, and I'll take a break.
Thanks, Chinwe. I mean, it's fascinating to hear you talk about all that again, because we talked about this, of course, at the beginning of our collaboration, yeah. But it reminds me of the sense that, in a way, you know, a collaboration between a writer and a composer, or maybe between any two people, is better if both people know slightly different things. And, you know, you come from you come from a similar kind of understanding maybe of the world, but you know different things about it. And you know, all of this is that's in the text of Kingdoms is things I didn't know really, and maybe I intuitively felt a truth to them, but I didn't know about the Library of Alexandria or the Book of Wisdom. And you know, it was really inspiring to have all these questions, but the text, even before I understood it fully, had a kind of integrity that spoke to me. And Kingdoms was the first lyric that Chinwe sent to me, and so it immediately struck me, you know, the atmosphere of it, particularly before I knew the details. These are the days of turbulent living. It really sets a scene, I think. But it's just one line at the beginning of, you know, quite a significant amount of text. So the first thought that I had when I saw that was, oh, there's something interesting here. I need to conjure this atmosphere of what turbulent living might mean. These are the days of turbulent living. But I don't want you can't go to maximum turbulence all at once in a way. Otherwise, what's the rest of the song for? You know, so you have to somehow insinuate this idea of turbulence in the music, so that the context is there for it. But then you let the words unfold the story before you kind of unleash the turbulence later, in a way. So that was my first thought, and that's all in a flash. You know, that it's not a long drawn out thought process. It's an instinct, I suppose. When I find some words that speak to me, and I think maybe, you know, I think I could actually make something musical with this. These decisions are made very quickly, I think, and it feels like the right thing. So I quickly, even just from the first few lines, I quickly sketched down some ideas and recorded them and sent them back to Chinwe and said, you know, is this a kind of atmosphere that you feel would serve your poem well and would work for you? And I think that their response was positive. You know, you said, wow, this is exactly what I'm hoping for here. And then we knew we were going to work well together. And that, you know, that's not to say that we didn't have some discussions sometimes about, you know, maybe I had to ask about some words and you had to ask about some of the examples I sent you. But it was a very natural process to set your words, Chinwe. It really kind of, it felt like the right thing to do. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, I could say a little bit more, I suppose, about you know, the way that this is. That there's a lot of subtle contradictions in those first few lines. So turbulent and living, nights of rebellion brewing, and then the days where the sacred is profaned. So you're presenting kind of opposites in a way.
Yes.
And that to me implied a certain kind of ambiguity in the musical setting. So it's not totally turbulent and it's not triumphant. It's not grand, but it's also not humble in a way. And therefore, the way that I chose to set it was to create a sort of ambiguity in the piano accompaniment at the very beginning. So when you listen to this piece, you will immediately feel a slight uneasiness, a slight tension that I've put in there, because you hear both the major and minor key at the same time. You know, within the first bar, you hear D minor and D major together, and that kind of persists through the piece. It doesn't feel very dissonant or modernist, but it feels slightly uncomfortable, like there's something remaining to be resolved. And all of that comes from that reflection of the text, really. The next thing I would say about the setting is that was something to build on, but I also felt there was an epic quality to Chinwe's writing, because of the way it references things from the past and lost wisdom, lost knowledge, but it's also very much about our times and the way that we view the world. The idea of creating an expanse of time, of history in the piece was important to me. So the way that I did that was to create a kind of harmonic stillness about the music for much of it. So it lives in one area harmonically for a long time sometimes, but also to create a sense of space between the high notes and low notes of the piano. And then the tenor voice would sit in the middle of that. So it's creating a sort of, if you like, a kind of simile or a simulacrum of that kind of span of history and time. The next thing was, of course, you know, when Chinwe asked me to write the piece, and I was very grateful that you, Chinwe, reached out and commissioned the piece from me, because, you know, it's not very often that a writer approaches one and says, you know, do you want to set my words? But it was obviously, I feel a duty to make sure that the words come across very clearly when they're sung. And, you know, you might think that that's a given and that's something that I would always do as a composer. And to a certain extent, that's true. But there are many different approaches to it. But here, it was a matter of allowing the words to unfold at a natural pace without being rushed, but also without lingering too long unless there was a really important point. So I decided quite early on for the verses of this, a fairly conversational way of setting the words, so that the singer could shape the lines in such a way that the text would come across very clearly, not without it, not making it unmelodic, but making the melody follow and twist itself around the syllables of the words so that it was always clear. And then what I did was I saved the more musical outbursts and repetition and lingering on particular words for the chorus and the word Alexandria in particular. So, you know, maybe almost a quarter of the song in the end is singing Alexandria at one point or another, because it's such a great word to sing, and you can really make a big, beautiful kind of exuberant proclamation out of it. And I think that's where I was coming from, really, as a starting point for the song. And you know, once I'd decided on those parameters, you could see how, you know, how the piece would write itself almost fairly quickly, and the rest is just about detail. Yeah.
You know what I can do? What do you think about us sharing just a little bit of the song? So, because I can actually play that right now.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes. So let's
I'll mute myself. Yeah.
Oh no, you don't need to do that at all.
Okay.
So, we're going to share our screen, and we're going to come here.
These are the days of turbulent living, followed by nights of rebellion brewing. These are the days where the sacred is profaned, followed by nights of cities set aflame. Where are the holy ones, the seers and the wise, to help us navigate the rapids and the fire? One man to rule them all, one hand to wield the sword. Soon he discards his earthly robes and seeks eternity for a throne. Where is the voice to whisper calmly, softly and subtle? Remember, human, that you're only mortal. Only mortal. Alexandria.
There you go.
Fantastic. They're such great performers too, Nick and Chris, aren't they? I mean, they just the commitment, you can hear it in every note that they play, really, and sing. So I felt really very fortunate to have them performing the pieces, because they're both such an amazing caliber of player. Yeah.
Same here. You know, sometimes I feel shy that I like the song so much, because I feel, okay, am I supposed to like something that I was a part of?
Why not?
You know what? It's a really beautiful song. And I have to tell you, I was so, you know, nervous reaching out to you. I mean, people may not know, but really, I hadn't done anything like this before. 2020, reaching out to a classical music composer. You know, I had done the first EP with Jeff Hanan, and then I came to you, but it was all very new for me. And when we were working on this song cycle together, honestly, I felt so lucky, because I felt like I was a little cricket on your shoulder when you would be working in the studio, you know, speaking to me, and you're a natural teacher. So sometimes you'd be teaching me, oh, this means this, and half of what you taught me, I forgot. I'll tell you right now. But I felt
me too, probably, yeah.
But I felt really lucky, you know, to have that experience and that opportunity to learn from someone who is a master at what he does. And when I'd sent you the lyrics, you sent me just about 13 seconds of music, like, hey, what do you think of this? And I listened, I was like, oh my God, I could just see it. when I heard it, I could just see something like a golden kingdom with its walls just falling apart into an abyss. It was just beautiful, beautiful music. So,
I mean, that's
yeah.
so, it's so great to hear and so kind of you to say so. But you know it's funny. You just don't know how these things come about, and it's one of those things that I find when I look at a text with a view to setting it to music. Sometimes I look at it at first and think, and well, almost every text actually, I look at it at first and say, I'm not sure quite what to do here, but that what I need to do is empty my expectations and preconceptions about what music I'm going to produce. And then just in that little space that I create, if I focus on the text, often something will creep in. If it's a text that I'm going to connect with, and that's kind of what happened. You know, you sent it to me, and of course I don't respond immediately to say yes, I'll do it. I read the text a few times first. I think, what is going to happen here? How am I going to do it? And I try not to force the process, but as soon as that music starts to flow somehow, however it happens, I know then whether I'm going to be able to do it or not. Yeah. So then I can respond positively and say, I think I can do this. Here, have a listen to this and see if it's what you like. So it's interesting you said golden kingdoms there. You know, I think, I mean, I'm not sure the word golden.
It was initially,
yeah,
and then not. But you know what? It doesn't make any difference in the end.
Did I make you take that one out, or did you take it out?
It was kind of inadvertently somewhere got lost. It wasn't intentional, but it actually didn't make any difference at all.
No, and it's one of those interesting things as well here is that quite often if let's say I'm setting a text by Emily Bronte, which I did last year, or a text by Christina Rossetti. I mean, I don't know how they would have felt about it, but I can take some liberties and make my own judgments about things and say, I'll just use these bits and not these bits. And the interesting thing is, you know, when I spoke to you about it, what was very clear was you had some flexibility, but there were things in here that were so important to you that they had to be there. They had to be preserved. And you had already set out a verse chorus structure, which is something that for me was very new, you know, to have that presented to me and think, right, so there's actually a form for the piece already in place here, and I have to work out which bits are related and should have the similar music and which bits do something different. So it was a really interesting experience for me to come into a process at that stage where you'd already thought about so much, really.
Yeah, you know, and I'm lucky that you are open and ready to work with that. Later on, I found out that not every composer wants to actually work with someone like me, where I've written everything, you know, in terms of verse, chorus. They don't necessarily want that.
No, I mean, it's funny. This leads on to the next question, actually, which was something I wanted to ask you, which is that what for you is the difference between writing lyrics and writing other kinds of poetry or creative writing? You know, because that is related to the way in which you imagine an overall form, I think.
Yeah.
But for you, what's the difference, and where did that need or feeling that you wanted to write lyrics come from?
So this whole thing, now we come into a very long answer, but I'll try to make it short.
I want a long answer. Yeah, I want to listen. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so all my life I kind of wrote, but not poetry. I wrote stories. I wrote little novels, but I didn't come from a background where you could do anything with arts. It wasn't encouraged or anything. And I chose science as a profession because I do love medicine. I really love it, but I also loved my art, and I'd have loved to have been able to do both together. It wasn't possible. And then I get out into, you know, I finish school and I come out into the workforce, and it's all about my work. It's very grueling and everything. And then I discovered Jeff Buckley, I believe in 2007 or 9, something like that. And I just had this, I was also in a place in my life where, okay, I'd done everything. I'd gone to school, I had a degree, I had a job, but I felt like something was missing. I really, really did. And after I discovered his music, I just had this period where I just started writing. And initially, I wrote songs, what I felt were songs. I was just writing. I have a whole bag of work. And when I was done one day, I just sat down and I'm like, what am I going to do with all of this? I didn't know what to do, really. This is true
Yeah.
story. So I just went on the internet. I'm like, okay, in the movies, when people write songs, they go to a studio and they record. So I was like, studio near me. I'm like, I have some songs, but I don't play an instrument. Never mind this piano behind me. It's not for me. And they're like, oh, okay. And they gave me the name of this guy, like, here, call this guy. And I didn't even do my due diligence. It ended up being this Grammy-winning pianist that he was in a group where they made this song, Afternoon Delights. I've forgotten his name. It will come to me. Anyway, and I sent stuff to him, and he's like, but are you sure these are songs? They're not poems. I'm like, no, they're songs. And anyway, I went through this whole phase where I made this recording. I didn't sing on it because I didn't feel that I was a singer. And so I commissioned people, they sang, and I never did anything with it. At one point, it was on the radio in Ireland or Australia, and I was just happy that, hey, I'm here in my little room and I did this. But I couldn't tour, I couldn't do anything. And so one day I was singing, and my mom said, but why are you singing these things? It sounds so nice when you recite them. I'm like, oh. And so I just started reciting poetry, and I published a poetry book, which I'm really happy with. When I switched over now, or when I thought about this project, when I wanted to commission composers, initially, I hadn't even thought that I was going to write anything in 2020, because there was a period of time where I hadn't written anything for many years. My life, life just takes over. And I reached out to a composer who I didn't end up working with, but he said, oh, do you have any text? I'm like, oh, actually, I'm a poet. And I thought about that book, and I was like, wait a minute, because I wanted my theme to be hope. And I'm like, you know what? There isn't actually any poem that's really about hope. I'm like, well, maybe I could write one. And I just sat down and I wrote Now As Before, the song on my other EP. And that was how it started again with songs. And how do I draw a distinction? I don't really like these songs could easily be poems. Just take out the chorus, just have them as verses and they're poems. Throw in the chorus and they're songs. For me, they're interchangeable. How I write, a line goes through my head. And if a line is interesting, I just grab a hold of it. And then I have to build on that line. And I usually hum some very simple tune. Usually I have the same tune recycled for many poems. So, but that's how it comes. And I think that helps it helps me. So it has a rhyme to it, a rhythm. That's how I write most of the time.
I think that's great that even if obviously my musical response is going to be different, and any composer would have a different response, but the fact that you conceive of it with a music in the background is really interesting, because I suppose I don't know, maybe that's what lends the texts a kind of pacing and a rhythmical feel that it doesn't have to be sung in that way, but it's embedded into the text, so it flows in a certain way.
Yeah, I think so.
Whereas if it was purely for speaking, I think it would maybe run slightly differently. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It might be the same thing in both ways. But sometimes, a poem can be fantastic for speaking, but it's very difficult to set to music. And I don't know why. But yeah, I
don't know. But and what I find so wonderful is your music is so beautiful and so powerful that it feels natural, like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be. It doesn't feel like, I just feel like, oh my God, this is what it was all along. Really, that's how I feel.
That's great. That's the way it should feel once I'm done with it. It should be like it. I mean, it should be like it ruins the text for any other composers. It's that sort of. Yeah, mind you, I've had some interesting experiences in the past where I've set a text. Which one? Yes, it was the Wilfred Owen's The Parable of the Old Men and the Young, which is it's a kind of it's a satirical kind of retelling of the Abraham and Isaac story, but filtered through the First World War experiences and the actions of the generals in particular. And I set that not knowing about any other musical settings of it, and I did it in my own way. And then other people said, "Oh, yes, so this is very different from the Britain, isn't it?" And I said, "All right, yeah, okay. So what's the Britain again?" And you know, of course, my ignorance showing terribly, but it's one of the most famous movements from his War Requiem.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, undoubtedly, I'd heard it, but maybe not engaged with it to the extent that many people had. So, you know, and I went and listened to Britain's version, and it was totally different. I mean, from mine, but that doesn't matter in a way. It's the kind of thing you could give a text to 10 different composers, and they would all come up with a different way of doing it, even while respecting the rhythm and the atmosphere and the mood. You'd have many different approaches, and it's one of those amazing things about the relationship between words and music, that it doesn't have to only exist in one way. But I do appreciate the fact that you feel like my setting has created a kind of definitive, you know, hybrid in a way, you know. I have something like that sometimes when I've written operas, and I spent so long working my way into thinking like the characters and understanding them and writing their music, but it's a kind of imaginary voice in my head that I'm hearing. And then I get into the rehearsal room, and the first time I hear those singers singing the parts, suddenly the music I've written becomes totally fused with that person's voice. You know, and whenever I remember it after that, I remember it in their voice. That does change if you hear other people singing it, but it's amazing how quickly it becomes embedded, that kind of musical experience.
There's a kind of magic. It doesn't sound scientific to say magic, but there is a sort of magic in this process, because there's that bit that's conscious, and then there's the bit that isn't conscious, and with the other songs we have here. So we have Stuart and I, we worked on 4 songs: Kingdoms, Life Unfiltered, Tethered Ships, and Primordial Cry. I don't know if anyone who will be watching this would have had a chance to listen. Hopefully you do go out there and check our album out, Songs for Our Times. So you get to listen to
but so you can buy the CD from Divine Art Recordings, or you can listen on the usual streaming channels, all of them. So and
then you get to. So Stuart, do you want to say more on Kingdoms, or should we speak now about?
Let's talk about Life Unfiltered, I think, because you know Kingdoms I think the rest of it is unspoken, and people just need to go and listen to it and see what they think. But Life Unfiltered, it has a kind of story behind it, doesn't it, Chinwe? And
yes.
It would be lovely to hear about that.
Okay, so I believe it was the end of 2020 when I came across an article. It was on the BBC magazine, for sure, and maybe even the Guardian. And in Castel San Giovanni, which is in Italy, there was an elderly man whose wife had fallen ill. It wasn't COVID, but because of the COVID precautions, he couldn't be in the hospital with her. And so he wanted to find a way to communicate with her, you know, to express his love. We're talking about an elderly couple here, the man probably maybe in his 80s. And so he plays the accordion, and he sat outside her hospital window playing music. And so in the article, you see him there with his instruments, and you see his wife being supported at either side by nurses because she's weak, she's really sick. But you can see the expression on their faces. They're really moved, and he gets to touch her this way. And I just thought it was so romantic in the most beautiful way, because here is this man, his wife is sick, it's towards the end, but his love is unwavering. It's unwavering, and how beautiful that he uses music to show that. So when I was thinking of what to write, so when I was making the cycle, I have these lines in my head, you know, and I pick each one. And I decide, okay, do I want to work on this one? And what am I telling, and I just wanted to talk about love, but not necessarily just romantic love, but love for one human to another, and the love you have when people sacrifice, whether it's firefighters, people like that. We all run away from fires, they are running towards the fire. That's a kind of love. And actually, when I was looking at my drafts, because I actually kept drafts when I was writing, and I saw I made many drafts of Life Unfiltered. I didn't think it was one of the ones that was more difficult to write, but it looks like it was, and it was initially called Love Unfiltered. Yes, and then I changed it somewhere along the way to Life Unfiltered. In Castel San Giovanni, by a hospital wall, a man played for his sweetheart, confined to its floors. In that
precious hour.
In that precious hours, theirs was a love that inspired, right? Transcending time and desire.
That's right. In that precious hour, theirs was a tale that inspires, transcending
time and desire. Yeah. Yes. How did you find, and you used a special, I remember when you were speaking to me, you said you used an Italian style of.
I did use it's a rhythm called a Siciliano, which is yum da dum dum da dum dum da dum dum, and it doesn't appear straight away, but there are certain words that I found I was able to work into that rhythm. So, for example, hospital. So instead of just hospital wall, I did hospital wall, which and that's like, I know it wasn't in Sicily, I think, but it was, but there was something Italian that's about it that made me feel a little association. And then also confined to its floors. So that what it did was it allowed me to kind of bring a more kind of a lighter, more sprightly kind of color to the rhythm of the music than might have initially happened. And it was definitely that knowledge of the story and the Italian kind of influence that made me do that in a kind of semi-conscious way. I was partly conscious and partly it's an unconscious reference. And one of the things about this, theirs was a tale that inspires, transcending time and desire. Now, I mean, people that know my music well of the past will know that a lot of the time it doesn't touch on the lighter side of life. It can be quite, it can deal sometimes with more difficult emotions and darker themes. But so the challenge in this for me was to find that lightness of touch, and it's not frivolous in any way, but to find a light-hearted and generous way of dealing with the subject matter and with the text that was going to be quite open sounding and not heavy.
Yes.
And that was something we discussed, that we really wanted this to be a kind, not a heavy piece, it's but something that expresses this idea of a tale that inspires. But having said that, when you get to the chorus, and I wonder if maybe you'd like to, have you got it in front of you to read it?
No, I think this I can remember. Yeah. The heart craves the wonder of being seen by another, to exist in their eyes without filter or guise, to be free of all armor and yet find oneself stronger. It's a state of existence without, how does it go?
Without boundary or limits.
Without boundary or limits. It's all off my head.
I mean, the thing is, you bring in then this sense of wonder. The heart craves the wonder of being loved by another, and then at the end of that chorus, all of that is a state of existence without boundary or limits. So for me, then it required a shift from this kind of lightness to something more. It's not quite ecstatic, but it's almost on a kind of spiritual plane, I think. And that reflects what you were saying about it being not just about romantic love, but about a kind of pure kind of love, the pure engagement with that. And therefore, for the chorus, I created a little kind of a transition into something that became much more kind of flowing, and it still trying to keep the lightness but deepening it somehow, so the way that I did that was to have a much more even text setting with sometimes multiple notes on one word. So it's what you call a melisma. So the word like wonder, instead of just going wonder, I did wonder.
Yeah, I love that.
So just to make it kind of open up a little bit. And that motif then repeats. And then the piano part goes from being quite kind of precise and light and rhythmical to something flowing. But I kept it in the high register so that it didn't become dark and heavy.
Okay.
I think at a certain point later, I moved down into the low register to kind of just deepen the impression. But it was a really interesting challenge to create that contrast, but stay within the spirit of the text.
I love that chorus. I remember when you were working on it, I didn't quite understand what it would sound like, initially. But when I heard Chris playing it, oh, I love it, and the way Nick sings it, oh, I love.
They float. That's the thing. It really floats when they play it. And the thing that was hard to get across was I was sending you some kind of MIDI mock-ups, and it sounds a bit clunky and too regular and not magical, But I, of course, knew that if you put it in the hands of great musicians, they will make it magical.
Oh yes, they certainly did.
And until you hear it, you can't tell this. I suppose that's just the experience of being a composer and working with musicians, is that you know what they'll do with it. So Chinwe had to trust me a little bit on that. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Yeah. But I did listen to what you were saying, and I changed some things. I made the transition smoother because, you're very kind of actually finely tuned to things that maybe are a little bit lumpy, So if I had a little bump there, you said there's something a little bit lumpy, and we found the precise moment. And you were right, it needed to be a little bit more, it needed to flow into that chorus rather than get there straight away. That was the key thing. It was really fun, though, to work that out. And
I loved it. And that was when you did a lot of teaching. I loved it. I loved learning. Yeah, really. And then our third song is Tethered Ships. Oh, this time I'm going to have to read because I don't want to use any poetic license here. So our third song is called Tethered Ships, and it goes, in the moments that allow reflection, I ask myself the eternal questions, but being neither oracle nor sage, the mysteries of existence remain unchanged. And then it goes into a chorus. No one sleeps tonight, not without a nagging sense of doubt. The world that we inhabit bears no semblance to the one that we imagined we'd be passing through. And just altogether, Tethered Ships is one song that has multiple interpretations. It's on the one end, it could be reassuring and consoling someone as they pass through the struggles that we have to go through in this world, but saying there's light at the end of the tunnel in this world. But it could also imply there's light at the end of the tunnel, but leading into another world. So there is some ambiguity to it. And you touched on that so beautifully with the music. This is another great one. All great.
In this one, obviously, the main image, of tethered ships. I mean, I imagine wherever the ships are tethered, but I imagine that kind of beautiful thing of, when you're in a harbor and you have all the ships tethered to the pier, and they just rock backwards and forwards gently, and you hear little tinkling sounds from the rigging, maybe, or some sort of rubbing against the edge, but there's a kind of gentle sort of flow to it. Or even if you're out at sea and you're at anchor, and the way that the boat just sort of gently rocks up and down. So that was the image that informed the musical idea. And again, there's a little piano introduction to this song. And it's a kind of gesture that starts with one chord, moves to another one next to it, and then rocks back to the first one. So it's got a rocking gesture.
Yes.
Da-dee-dum, da-dee-da, that kind of thing. That's built into the music then, with a kind of deep flowing sound, rolling sound from the bass coming up, which is about the kind of depth of the sea in a way. So once you have that kind of imagery in your mind and you then unite that with some harmony, you already have a kind of musical structure. And then the thing is, you say, well, okay, how do we, you could have the singer sing, in the moments that allow reflection, but then it would take too long to get through the whole text, you know, because it'd be slow. So in some senses, the text is given in a very conversational way here. It begins low in the singer's voice, almost speech-like, with almost speech rhythms, with this flowing accompaniment in the background, evoking the imagery of the sea and of the tethered ships. That's not the way it stays throughout, though, because once we, again, there's this great thing of having the contrasting chorus. So where I'm sorry, I'm leafing through the music here. Just
because in the final chorus, it changes and it goes, all who lie tonight, beneath the veil of prayer offered high, draw from night your valor, let your sails unfurl. When daylight is upon us, we'll be on our way. All who search for solace, all who dream tonight, beneath a veil of prayer, rise into the skies. The world that will await us when we lift our eyes surpasses every aspect of the one we've left behind.
But that is an amazing line, though. I mean, the world that will await us when we lift our eyes surpasses every aspect of the one we've left behind. It's a landing of the text and of the whole kind of imagery of the thing, and we realize that, I think, at that point, that the text is telling us something much more profound than just what the surface would tell us. You know, it's kind of a glimpse underneath in a way, and also that kind of all who lie tonight beneath a veil of prayer offered high. I really felt that as a kind of clarion call. It was like almost it had to me a kind of a calling out to people to join together, or I suppose clarion is the best way of putting it. It's like a signal in some ways, and therefore I knew I wanted it to be very striking. Yes. So the previous choruses, which have been no one sleeps tonight, are quite active. They have the same material as the first one, but the vocal line is higher and more active. But this one I wanted right at the top of the singer's voice, where it can be loud with a really bright accompaniment. So it's like it jolts you out of complacency. And then that allows this kind of very mysterious ebbing down from that very kind of bright moment to this incredible realization at the end of the song. So it created a trajectory for me in a way, doing that.
It did. The music is very powerful, and for me it was just amazing, because I remember when you were working on it, I didn't quite understand how it shifted, and you said, well, look at the words, look at what you wrote, and you actually opened up my eyes, because initially when I wrote it, I was thinking of it only in the sense of, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel while you're on this earth. That's all I was thinking. But then you said, no, but look at what you wrote. And I was like, you know what? This isn't as simple as that. You know, there's another layer that we're actually speaking about, the next world, and you have to come to peace with that as well. You know. Yes,
that's it, isn't it? You know, it's almost a kind of wake up where we are looking towards the next world and not just this one. Open your eyes kind of thing, you know. And I mean, it's interesting. Another composer might approach this quite differently, because you could say the words, all who lie tonight beneath a veil of prayer offered high. That could be seen as quite a gentle, you know, prayerful, internalized kind of emotion. But I looked more to the following two lines: draw from night your valor, let your sails unfurl. When daylight is upon us, we'll be on our way. I mean, that's really huge. So you could have had you could have had the contrast halfway through that, but I decided to bring that daylight in right at the beginning of the chorus to kind of make it into this big realization. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful. I love that one. And then our fourth song was Primordial Cry. This was the most difficult for me to
Was
write,
it?
lyric-wise. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I will just read this. The grass was cool, which was a wonder for such a day in such a summer. I'd moved away from where they were, found solace in the sage-filled air, through the rippling haze of heat, neither awake, neither asleep. I thought a vision came to sight, but wasn't raised to altered heights. No epiphany was found to free my stifled sound. I want to cry out, I want to cry out. So this song, Primordial Cry, I was talking about being in a situation where you feel stifled or trapped and you sort of lose interest in the things around you, and the usual things that bring you joy or bring you an epiphany don't. And then eventually, after some internal struggle, but it's something that has to come from within you, you then find that epiphany and have a release. So that's what the song, this was the internal struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember I think we'd already written the first three songs, and then you said, oh, by the way, there's this other text. Do you want to have a go at that one?
You know why, Stuart? Because let me tell you something. I was doing all of this as I was giving you things. I was furiously writing because something would come to mind. And now that I had you, you have to understand, this opportunity. I was like, oh my God, how about this one?
Absolutely. And the thing is, I wouldn't say this was difficult for me, but it was also interesting because it has, again, this, you have to get the contrast, but maybe not such a big contrast in this. So, for example, it has this kind of, the opening kind of gesture, and the piano is quite gentle, but it's still relatively loud and present, because it's not a reverie, this piece. It's not meant to put you to sleep. It's meant to actually be, you're searching for something. There's an element of struggle. So getting that kind of sense of flow and struggle at the same time was the thing I had to do. So I guess what I was thinking of was the image of, a summer day through the rippling haze of heat, neither awake, neither asleep. So, I don't know how well this comes across, through the thing. But I've got, yeah. So this idea of the rippling haze of heat, I decided not to do a kind of rippling effect on the piano, but just to let the notes sing against each other. So this kind of so that there's a sort of sense of things being resolved, but still kind of shimmering a little bit against each other. And the idea of wonder is there again, which we had in one of the other songs. So trying to capture that sense of wonder, which of course, if you say to the singer, if you write the right kind of music and you say to the singer, sing with wonder, a great singer, they just know exactly what to do. They open themselves up to it and they can communicate that. So everything gets amplified. But the challenging bit for me in this was this kind of more struggle element. The no epiphany was found to free my stifled sound. I want to cry out, because that has to be a cry from the heart, and it has to convey a sort of desperation, but without a lack of hope. And that was something that I had to think a little bit more about. And the way I did it was to make the vocal line a very kind of strident thing, so it has this kind of going up in fifths, so it's got very kind of open fifth kind of sounds, repeated notes, quite sharp and pointing, but at the same time the piano is playing quite rich chords, very rich chords, almost they're kind of jazz influenced.
I was just going to say that there's a jazzy feel to this song, and it works just so.
They just move around in an unconventional way with lots of extended notes, and it's to give this idea of struggle at the same time as still not losing hope, and that. So there's a conflict there in a way, which is embodied in the relationship between the singer and the piano. And it's that gives rise to kind of it's very cruel to the singer, but the loudest moment in the whole cycle, which is at the very end, where it ends with "Here I cry out," and the singer
Yes.
at the top of his voice crying out, and massive piano chords at the very end. But I felt this was a great way to end the cycle and to put them in this order, because it really feels like the final "Here I cry out" is almost like a cry of triumphance or resolution, or resolve is the word. You know, it's not a cry of desperation, it's a cry of resolve and a cry of determination, you know, and I think that for me summed up the sort of feeling of the whole cycle, that there's a sense that things are not finished, but there's a determination to carry on and to prevail.
Yeah, totally. And actually it worked out very well, because, you know, I didn't know anything, of course, about how opera singers train their voices, but the voice is stronger as the day progresses, not first thing in the morning. Yeah. So actually it was great that this huge notes came at the end, because he'd done all the warm up, you know, and singing up to that point. So it was just beautiful and sounded gorgeous then, and sounds gorgeous now on the album.
That's great. Yeah, it's true. Opera singers, you don't want to give them the big high notes first thing in the morning. No, they wouldn't thank you for that. No.
So it was great, and and for anyone who would be watching this, again, once you listen to the album, then everything will fall in place, because I don't have these particular songs to play right now. I could, but I don't have the videos. We have Kingdoms. It's out there on YouTube, so you can listen to the whole thing, and then get the album on Divine Arts Records, which has been an absolutely great record label. You know, Stuart, this is my sort of really first foray in this sort of thing, and they've been so wonderful. They've been so wonderful.
Fantastic.
Yes,
fantastic. Yes. And we can put we're going to leave this video up on YouTube so that people can watch it. So thank you very much for anyone who joined us either live or in the future, or I don't know, the past, the present, whenever you watch this. But we'll put the details and links to the album in the description of the YouTube video if we can, so that you can easily refer to it, and we hope that you enjoy listening to the album.
Yes, indeed. And Stuart, is a great time to say thank you for your beautiful music. Thank you for coming on and putting everything in here, and we have a way to go to get the music as much as possible, you know, into as many ears and hearts as possible. But I have to say thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me. And you know, and I'm so glad that it's out there now and we can share it.
Yes, it's beautiful. So thank you, everyone. Please, Stuart has a website, a very beautiful website, so you can check out his website, listen to his other work. I'm here on YouTube, writer Chinwe John. Please subscribe, and we look forward to sharing more music with you in the future. So thank you, and thank you, Stuart.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.